But anyways, I talked to him to come into church, and he finally decides to come. So the pastor gives an altar call, and Kenny stands up, and he walks forward, to which I was very shocked, and his life changed immediately. So here, Jesus affirms, and you want to write this down, disciples will have enemies. Disciples will have enemies. Earlier in this chapter, when they were very popular, verse 22, we read it, he says, blessed are you when men hate you and ostracize you and insult you and scorn your name as evil for the sake of the Son of Man. So Jesus is saying to his disciples, he says, you see all these crowds? You're very popular now. They're coming from everywhere to here. But just know this, it's not always going to be like this. There's going to come a time when you're going to experience the other side, and that's their hatred of you. So disciples will have enemies. So he says, love your enemies and do good to those who hate you. So when he says, I want you to love, agape, your enemies, he's just asking his disciples to do what God has already done. So in Romans, Paul says this in Romans 5. Paul says, for if, while we were enemies, we were reconciled to God, and he goes on and he talks about that. There was a time before we knew Jesus, we were enemies of God. Some of us were very hostile to God. But have you noticed that our hostility towards God never stopped him loving us, never stopped him putting people in our path, never stopped him from, drawing us to him. And it had nothing to do, he just chose to love us while we were enemies. So that's what I do, that's what my disciples do. So our hostile behavior did not stop God from loving us. Then he goes, verse 27, he says, but I say to you who hear, love your enemies and do good to those who hate you. So write this down. Disciples do good to those who hate them. When you decide that you want to be a disciple, God is either going to allow or intentionally, however you choose to look at that, he's going to allow somebody to be placed in your path that he wants you to reach, and it's not going to be easy. And they're probably going to start out very hostile to you and everything that you believe. Now, a believer can just walk away, but a disciple has to do good to those who hate them. And I remember many years ago, I won't go into the story too much, but it was about 35 years ago, before I went on staff at Calvary Fort Lauderdale, and before we moved here, I was in a sales organization. I'd been there for a while. And so this new guy comes into the company, and his name was Kenny. Kenny was from New York, and Kenny had been a collector for the mob in New York. And so they made me ride with Kenny. Now, let me just say, I was a Baptist. I was a Sunday school teacher at Sheridan Hills Baptist Church, which is probably on the Richter scale, is about as Baptist can be. Kenny, on the other hand, had been a collector for the mob. So we had to ride together. Now, Kenny's from New York, and this is not picking on New Yorkers, this is just telling how Kenny was. The way that Kenny would drive is one hand would be on the wheel, the other hand would be outside the window making gestures at everybody else on the road, and he would be just screaming profanities as though he was surprised that other people would be on the road, apparently. So he was just screaming and yelling, and it was just vile coming out of him. I'm sitting in the passenger seat, and I just want to go home and take a shower. I feel so dirty, And so we began to talk when he wasn't, profusely using profanity. And one day he turns to me, and he's very Italian. And by the way, we're still the best of friends. We weren't at that point, but we became. But I remember he goes, oh, not for nothing, Dan, but you go to the church like all the time. And so I opened the door and I began to share, and I go, and he would ask questions. I said, why don't you come to church? Well, I'm not going to go to church. I go to church, God's going to strike me with the lightning there, So, but anyways, I talked to him to come into church, and he finally decides to come. He's asking questions, and I'm answering questions. And this was very, very difficult, because being in his presence meant just feeling dirty, it's the only way I know to describe it. So we go to church. He's been asking all these questions, finally comes to church. And this is about as Baptist as a church can be. I mean, like organ on this side, piano on that side. And so the pastor gives an altar call, and Kenny stands up, and he walks forward. Sorry. To which I was very shocked. And his life changed immediately. But it was, yeah. I'm crying because what I had to go through to just, but the thing is, it was so repulsive to be around him in the beginning. And I would say, can I just ride with somebody else? No, we need you to ride with him. And I'm so glad after the fact, and I saw what the Lord was doing. And just know that when you become a disciple, God's going to put somebody that's going to be offensive to you. They're offended by you. They don't like your Jesus, but he wants you to respond to them with that agape love because he wants to use you to reach them. Does that make sense to you? So God's happened a couple of times in my life. So Jesus says, my way is very different. The world says, walk away, just be done with them. But his way is very different. So sometimes they're going to hate you, but you have to do good to them because he wants to use you to reach those who are at times very hostile. So how far do we go with this? We'll write this down. Jesus is the example. Write down, Jesus washed Judas's feet. Jesus washed Judas's feet. Now, here's what this doesn't mean. This doesn't mean that you make them your counselors. It doesn't mean that you put them in a trusted position if they're hostile to you. It just means as best that you can, you do good to them. Verse 28, I put it on your outline. Verse 28, it says, bless those who curse you, pray for those who are abusive to you. I love this because the word blessed there is eulogio, from where we get the English word eulogy. And that's what it means, to speak well of. And it's like at a funeral. Have you ever noticed that no matter how bad the person was, whose funeral it is, nobody says anything negative? Like they walk up and they go, I know, and he loved to fish, and fish feared him, And so, but everybody finds something kind to say. Nobody ever walks up and says, hey, I know that guy. He's totally in hell. They never say that. It's always, they find something positive to say. So this word, when it says, bless those who curse you, so eulogize those who curse you. So here's what this means. As a disciple, we have to speak kindly about those who speak badly about me. It's badly about me. So as a disciple, when you become a disciple, it won't be long before there's somebody out there and they're speaking bad about you in some way. And they're going to be speaking very negatively. And you're going to hear about it because somebody's going to come up to you and say, hey, I was out there, I was talking to so-and-so, and here's what they told me about you. And they begin to relate all this stuff. And you go, I know it's not true, but everything inside of you wants to go, oh yeah, they said that about me. Let me tell you about them. And then you want to spew it back. Well, disciples don't do that. We don't behave that way. Sometimes we have to say nothing at all, and sometimes we just have to let the Lord work it out. Here's what it's not saying. If there's somebody and they've been dishonest in business activities, they've been immoral in some way, they've hurt other people, and somebody comes to you and says, hey, I'm thinking about using this person, would you recommend them? You can't say, oh, you try to find something nice. So you have to speak the truth in love. It's not that you're running them down, but you have to speak the truth in love. Sometimes you have to protect the next victim. Sometimes in church world, we're so afraid of speaking evil that we allow somebody else to become the next victim. And that's not what this is talking about. Does that make sense to you? Okay. So then verse 28 again, so bless those who curse you and pray for those who mistreat you. As a disciple, we're called to honestly and sincerely pray for those who have taken advantage of you or of us. They've hurt you and we're called to pray for them. Now here's why. If you're like me, We've all been hurt in life. It's just part of being in life. And some of us could tell some stories, horrific things. And what happens is we begin to rehearse it, nurse it, and curse it. That is, we begin to go over it and over it and over it, and it begins to just grow and grow and grow. And then you find yourself, you're laying on your bed, you can't go to sleep at night because you're just going over it and over it and over it. And so we're told to pray for those who hurt us. And well, read this verse and I'll unpack it. Paul would say, see to it that no one comes short of the grace of God, that no root of bitterness springing up causes trouble, and by it many be defiled. You see, bitterness, when we don't pray for them and we just let it sit there and fester, it's like a root, and it grows down deep, and then it begins to come out. And then it says many are defiled, and they're defiled because there's that thing inside of us. We want to get as many people on our side as we possibly can. And so what happens when we don't begin to pray for people, that unforgiveness, that bitterness begins to grow. And what I've learned in my life, that the people who have hurt me the most, they just went on with their life. And they're not even thinking about it. But I'm carrying this huge weight. And what I've learned is I have to forgive them, not for them. They don't care. They went on. I have to forgive them for me so I can go on. Now, forgiveness for me is like this. It might be different for you, but it's like this for me. I've learned that forgiveness is a decision, and then it's a process, okay? So I'm hurt, I decide I'm going to forgive. 10 minutes later, I'm driving down the road and I'm fighting with those people in my mind. They did this and I have to admit, no, I've chosen to forgive them, and I have to keep coming back to that choice because it's a choice and it's a process. And at least that's the way that it's been for me. So because they've just gone on with their lives. So the antidote to when they've hurt us is we begin to pray for them as we forgive them, and we're called to take on the heart of God. The idea is you can't be a bitter disciple. You can't be a bitter disciple. And so Jesus takes it a step further, and he says not only does he expect his disciples to leave the vengeance, in the hands of God, but he calls us to petition God on their behalf to pray that they receive mercy. Do you remember when Jesus was on the cross? I mean, you know what they did to him, and what does he say? Father, forgive them. They have no idea what they're doing. That's what it means to be a disciple. If you can't do that, you can't be a disciple. Doesn't mean you're not going to heaven, just means you can't be a disciple.